everybody. So I thought I'd film a little personal diary entry for you now, since I've been thinking more about this thing that I decided to do the other day, i.e. putting myself forward to become a candidate for the Labour Party. And I think I'm thinking about it now with a little bit more of a sober head on my shoulders. And I still want to do it. I still think it's a really important thing to do. But I think one of the underlying factors that inspired me to go for this in the first place was having watched a Jonathan Pye video on YouTube, where he was talking about the fact, ostensibly at least, that homelessness could be eradicated in 6 months with a few £1 million. And I don't quite agree with him, having done a back of the envelope calculation of there being, say, 280,000 homeless people in the UK multiplied by £5,000 for the cost of the average room in the United Kingdom, currently saying you could eradicate homelessness for £1.4 billion hence. And I am also thinking now that there are numerous other difficulties associated with doing that, such as the obvious problem of drug addiction and things like this. And I think annexed to this movement to eradicate homelessness, you would also need to have a movement pushing for drug decriminalisation, i.e. blanket decriminalisation of all drugs. And I would append that by saying that I would also advocate the legalisation of cannabis. And this is pretty much the only reason I want to enter politics at all, I think. And it really is to push for this one issue, this issue of legalising cannabis and this issue of decriminalising all drugs. I think that's the sort of platform I'd like to stand on. But then even the Labour Party, they haven't had a particularly great history, frankly, of advocating those sorts of policies. They raised cannabis from a Class C to a Class B drug totally stupidly, I think. They made magic mushrooms illegal entirely, whereas before only the dried form of the mushroom was illegal. And yeah, it was a Tory government back in 1971 that advocated pushing the war on drugs here in the United Kingdom as opposed to just in Nixon's America. And they adopted these Nixonian policies here, where just like in the 1980s they adopted Reaganic policies, you know, the Reaganite policies and so on. And, well, they never really adopted Obamian policies after the 2010 election, did they? They just sort of went gung-ho towards their policy of austerity and crippled the poorest of the poor in this country, and that squeezed the middle and so on, and the rich got richer and so on, and you know, the rest, as they say, is history. But yeah, I mean, this is something I've also been shying away from doing, since I've had the sort of, I think, slight delusion in my mind that it might affect my comedy career in some way, if I were to be running for office as not really as an established comedian, but as a young comic. As a young comic who is still pretty much a non-entity in comedy. And yeah, I don't know what I'm thinking. It's ridiculous. The thing I really want to be, obviously, is a comedian, but I think I also have the rhetorical skill and potential to be quite an effective and convincing advocate for drug reform within the Labour Party. And the major stumbling block to that is the Labour Party's past history of having advocated more draconian drug policies, and thinking that through legislating more stringently and strictly against drug use, that problem can be solved, whereas it obviously can't. And the last 10 years or so of British history when it comes to drugs, I think, have proven that. So, and also particularly the last 5 years or so after the Psychoactive Substances Bill, which was not a Labour Party initiative but a Tory Party initiative, and talking about getting rid of all these research chemicals and so on, which really only emerged in reaction to yet more draconian drug policing and drug policies. And yeah, blanket drug reform has to come in the form of decriminalisation. Because if you decriminalise drugs, people stop using them as much. And people stop using them as much because they're permitted. If you're allowed to use something, it suddenly loses its mystique. It suddenly loses that sort of allure that it's illegal, it's bad. And I'm talking particularly about, you know, use of it among the young, who, and having been young myself and still being young really, know that the young, yeah, they do use a lot of drugs. and they use the drugs because they're not allowed to. That's the thing about it. It adds on this level of mystique and allure that, yeah, it's very enticing to them. So if you make it legal, decriminalise, you know, or at least decriminalise, suddenly you find out that, yeah, only a handful of people really, by comparison, continue using them or start using them in the first place. One or two people experiment every now and then and so on. Or you get the diehards who use moderately, as opposed to people caning it on cannabis and using high potency cannabis every fucking day or whatever. And more than that, instead of just having to go for the high potency cannabis that's available on the streets, you suddenly start getting what you get in Dutch coffee shops, which is a selection of cannabis where you can see how strong it is. And you can go for the high potency stuff if you like, or you can go for what I used to go for in Utrecht when I was there, which was called house weed, like house wine, but weed. And smoke that, and it's fine. And you still get all these people on the right wing, of course, who are like, I've never done a drug in my life. The reason I'm successful is because I've never taken drugs, and so on and so forth. And, you know, obviously they're caning alcohol every night of the week at home and failing to realise that alcohol is every bit as dangerous, if not significantly more dangerous than cannabis. And, you know, you've got drink driving problems still hugely in Britain because of our inane and incessant drinking culture, which could happily be ameliorated by the introduction of a bit more cannabis culture, frankly, since cannabis would not make you a more dangerous driver. If anything, it'd make you a safer driver. Not that I'm advocating people driving on cannabis, but still, it's this country's fucked up, and I want to change it. I'd probably never get elected, and the Labour Party will probably see that and never put me forward as a candidate. But I don't know. I just thought I'd do this because I really, really do want to see things change here. It's massively important to me, and I don't know. There's a million other ancillary benefits to cannabis, such as that it can be used for carbon sequestration, and it can be used for repairing damage to soil, and it can repair soil degradation and what have you. And I envisage a beautiful future with forests of cannabis being grown in areas amenable to it for carbon sequestration, and a big push with cannabis towards regenerative agriculture and things like this also. And the problem with this deregulation and decriminalisation of cannabis and so on, that can be done like that. It can be done overnight, and it will produce positive impacts within 6 months. Whereas the Jonathan Pye attitude of just throwing millions and millions of pounds, whereas it would be billions, towards eradicating homelessness, which in his mind it would do, you know, that wouldn't work. And that is very much the Labour Party attitude of constantly throwing money at stuff. And that does not work. Policies need to be cleverer, I feel, and less dogmatic. And we need to push things also for things like, I think, subsidised but not free healthcare, if you know what I mean. And following more like the French model when it comes to healthcare. And we might live in a healthier nation where people, don't smoke, drink as much, don't eat as much, take care of themselves a bit more, possibly smoke a bit of weed at the weekend instead of drinking, and so on. And I do believe in a better future for this country, and I think I should be elected. Said no politician ever, but that's why I want to do this, because I am passionate about this stuff. I can either be passionate on stage about it as a comedian and try and make it humorous, or I can be a politician and try to make progress happen that way, or both, frankly. Eddie Izzard's doing both, I don't see why I can't. Why should she get all the fun with politics and not me? I don't see why that should be the case. Do you? I don't. Plus, I'm younger than she is, so, well. However, she is more famous than me, so there's that. And I'd be like the other trans person in Labour. But then again, running her just on the fact that she's trans, I mean, that's not a good enough reason to exclude me from being a politician also. Why not have two transvestites? Trans people. You know, there can be Eddie Izzard in her wonderful male lesbian get-up, and me in my sort of black leatherette bondage stuff. And I want a nice big plume of black feathers. Also, to look absolutely fabulous in that, also. Yes, lovely. And black makeup and everything. Maybe not black makeup, maybe I'll do black makeup for the Queen's funeral. That'll happen. That'll happen in the next few years, I reckon. I give her 5 years, then she's dead, and then we're going to have Prince Charles. Think of that. He might try and take personal rule. like his predecessor namesake. Like, think of that. What if he goes mental as king? Because he's pretty old, remember? And he's pretty mental, we all know that. And, whew, what a thought. So yeah, granted, I think tackling the issue of homelessness in society is a little bit more complex than either I or Jonathan Pye would have initially liked to believe it would be. Probably a bit more costly than it would be. However, through decriminalisation of all drugs and through the legalisation of cannabis, I believe it could be at least funded. And addiction programs could be, addiction recovery programs could be funded also by those means, as they were in Portugal. And yeah, we need to learn from the examples set by other countries on these issues, and we need to change our attitudes towards drug use. Stop making pariahs out of users, stop stigmatising them and turning them into yet another group in society that people on the right just love to bitch and moan about and assume their level of supposed higher status or superiority in society, rather than adopting the more traditional left-wing values of equality and brotherhood and so on, and seeing, you know, your man on the street as your brother, and yeah, giving him a little bit of money even if it is for drugs and whatnot, like I do, and seeing one another more as equals rather than as, you know, I'm your superior, I spit upon you, and so on, and that sort of rubbish that the right wing just love to do for any sort of marginalised group or whoever. It seems unpalatable in the moment to the rest of them, because they all follow one another like sheep. That's the thing about them. One person mouths off and one goes, I agree with that. And then the rest of them like hoard in on the opinion, like, and in a sort of servile manner just go around spouting the same rhetoric. And, you know, it is what it is. So thank you everyone for watching. Bye bye bye. I love you lots. And this has been my personal diary for today. Thank you. Bye.